Hi everyone, this is Martin Nutty and you're listening to the Irish Stew podcast. It's the end of 2025 and it's the time of year when I invite our next guest, Ted Smyth, to join me on the podcast to talk matters political. Ted is a former member of the Irish Diplomatic Corps and, following a successful career in the Department of Foreign Affairs, he switched his attention to the corporate world, where he continued his successes in the C-suite of a number of major organizations. Ted is also the president of the advisory board of Glucksman House at New York University and is chair of the Clinton Institute for American Studies in the University College of Dublin. I'm always delighted to spend time talking to Ted about matters political from both an Irish and American perspective. Before we start, a big thank you to our media partner, Irish Central. If you're looking for information related to Ireland and the Irish, be it news, history, travel, opinion, or cultural information, irishcentral.com is the place to go. And now, Ted Smyth. Ted Smyth, welcome back to the Irish Stew podcast. It's the end of 2025. And there is much to talk about.
Thank you, Martin, and it's a great pleasure to join you once again with Irish Stew and to talk to your great audience in Ireland and the United States and to celebrate what you've been doing this past year. I particularly loved your Off the Track episode, and having grown up in County Meath, one of those pass-through counties in Ireland, and I saw you went to Birr Castle, another great jewel, and visited local hostelries, which is, of course, the essence of Irish hospitality. And it was a great thrill to listen to those and to enjoying yourself in Ireland.
Thanks, Ted. I'm glad you've been enjoying our Off the Beaten Crack episodes, and there will be more forthcoming in the new year. But let's start here on the American side of the Atlantic. We're 11 months into the Trump presidency. What have we learned?
I think the major lesson is to remember what Lord Acton, the British historian, said in the 19th century. He said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the point he was making in this letter was that unchecked authority leads to massive abuse, and people should be held accountable to standards that prevail in society. And what we've seen in this first year of Donald Trump's second term is basically a rolling coup against American democracy. That might surprise some people, but if you put everything together that's happening, including the ice-masked stormtroopers in every American city, arresting grandmothers, detaining U.S. citizens, basically on how they look, acting with impunity, and Republican Congress not taking any action to check the president, the Supreme Court agreeing that he is without control, that there is no criminal action he can take. They gave him that sort of power. That, to me, is not America. It's not democracy. It's not what the Constitution says, what the Founding Fathers intended. And that's obviously very alarming. And we can come to what we can do about it and what is being done about it. But to me, that's the wake-up call for us as we enter 2026.
It seems to me there's been a shift in sentiment. Last month's off-year elections were very positive for the Democratic Party, with victories in the governor races in Virginia, New Jersey, along with my hometown of New York City, where Zohran Mamdani took the mayor's race. What were your impressions of these outcomes?
Thank you for drawing attention to those. That, I think, is a great hope. It shows that the silent majority in America is waking up. Both Democrats, but also independents and Republicans are saying this is not what we elected. And remember, Donald Trump didn't have a massive mandate. He just squeezed in. But people who did vote for him are having buyer's remorse. And they're taking any opportunity to say, we want a balance in this country. We don't want unchecked power. It's not who we are. The election of Mamdani, who prides himself as a social democrat, which is really a fairly conservative movement in Europe by comparison, it was all about affordability. It was about people not being able to afford the basics and the rich getting richer and the middle class being hollowed out. And that resounded to people. He had 35,000 volunteers in New York City. You know that, Martin. What did he do? He went around, talked to everybody and said, what's concerning you? And then they said, I can't afford to pay my gas bills. I can't afford electricity. I'm falling behind on my payments. And he played those videos back in his campaign. He didn't speak about himself. He allowed the people to speak. So that was a fabulous win for democracy. And even on Israel, and we'll come to that, I'm sure, later on, he was very critical of Netanyahu, but not of Jews. And American Jews, 1/3 of New York Jewish Americans voted for him because they realized he had the right policies and that he wasn't anti-Semitic. He managed to do many things which are signs of great hope, and the same for the governors of New Jersey and Virginia, both Democrats, both practical people who talked about bread and butter issues. And I think this is the future for any party that stands up to Trump's rolling coup, is that they talk about the everyday issues. People want solutions, and they've always wanted politicians to solve their problems. And Trump is not doing that for them right now.
So I'm going to push back here. Cast your mind back to the Reagan era, now more than 40 years in the past. I'll direct you to 2 Reagan quotes. Government is not the solution, government is the problem. And of that pithy quote, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language: I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Those quotes set the stage for a concerted effort to reduce the size of government, and some might say that the notion was broadly supported by American voters. So do those voters really want or expect the government to solve problems?
Ironically, Trump is the opposite of Reagan because he is in favor of big government. ICE is got the budget of twice the armed forces budget of United Kingdom, of Great Britain, and its people are everywhere. He is using the power of government to interfere in the market with his massive tariffs, which are attacks on ordinary people and on business. So he is intervening in many ways with a massive state power, and that's the opposite of what Reagan believed in. He believed in the freedom of individuals to define their lives. But government, small government, that is interested in looking after people is still very important in life. The free market, so to speak, isn't interested in looking after old people, for example, in looking after children, in building roads, in ensuring that there's a public service and that we have parks and so forth. These are all things that government can do and should be doing. It should be making sure that when the snow falls, that you get the plows out and clear the roads. These are things that we pay taxes for, and they are important. And when it comes to monopolies in capitalism, which happens, and the price of everything goes up, and ordinary people can't afford it, then government steps in and says, we've got to have fairness here. We've got to have competition. That's what capitalism is about, not about monopolies.
You used the word practical earlier when describing Governors-elect Abigail Spanberger of Virginia and Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey. There's been much critique on practicality directed at Zohran Mamdani, New York City's mayor-elect. How do you see these Democratic Party leaders stacking up against each other?
It's almost too early to say, but each of them brings something to the party, which is important. Personally, I think what we need in a Democratic candidate for president in 3 years' time, but we need to pick one probably in a year's time, is somebody who looks like they could punch you in the face. They need to be tough. They need to be willing to stand up and defend people. And you need to be a strong president. Now, Trump turned out to be a very selfish president. He's strong, but he's strong in his own interests and that of his family. And that's not what we need. We need a champion of the people. But we don't need a woke president. I think Democrats went way off key with their wokeism and focusing on identity issues is really a trap. We need someone who comes from the people, who is mainstream, and to whom people can relate. And there are a few of those out there in America. I think Josh Shapiro, for example, of Pennsylvania, shows that he can work with both Democrats and Republicans, and as he says, get shit done, if that's a word we're allowed to use on the Irish stew. But it's become an important rallying cry in government. Get stuff done. That's what we elect you to do. Don't get snarled up in internal fights. Break through all the paralysis of government that sometimes happens. If you're going to be a successful mayor of a town, people don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, as long as when you turn on the tap, clean water comes out of it. And that's what politics is really about. You go back to Irish Democratic leadership in New York City, at Tammany Hall. People talk about its corruption, but at its best, it was delivering jobs for people. It was delivering welfare and saving people from exploitation. So we have a proud history which shaped FDR's Fair Deal, and we need to continue to invest in that sort of a candidate, and that's a party. People say, oh, the Democratic Party is split. It's got Mamdani in one hand and Conservatives on the other hand. It has to be a broad church. It needs to have people who can represent the citizens in their area. So some constituencies are very obviously Democratic. Some districts are very obviously purple and mix. And you need to have candidates to attract support in each area. My nephew, my wife's nephew, George Whitesides, is a Democratic representative in California in a constituency which is half commuters into Los Angeles and half farmers and Hispanics. And he's very active there. He got elected on a very tight margin last November. And what he's doing is just local politics, like Tip O'Neill always said. Get out there, be local, represent people. He goes to a different church practically every week, not to preach or do anything, but just to show up and listen to people and meet them afterwards. That's respect. That's talking to people locally and not telling them what you believe or what they should believe.
On the Republican side of the political aisle, Mike Johnson seems to be having increasing difficulty controlling his rest of caucus in light of the off-year election results. How do you expect that to play out in 2026?
I think the way it's looking right now is the midterms will see a big switch towards Democratic control, provided we do pick candidates who are common sense, bread and butter candidates. And I think that's happening. And we're responding to a national mood for changes. I like to think that you have 20% on the left, 20% on the right, and then everybody else plays in between that. And they don't want an unchecked president, be Democrat or Republican. They want to send a lesson out here. We want to be heard. You can't go on doing all these things with the growing power of the surveillance state, with a lot of corruption and people enriching themselves and the middle class getting poorer. Even if you earn $100,000 these days, and we can talk more about affordability, you still have difficulty paying bills. It's absurd. So there's just so many people in this country who should be making a decent living and able to support their families, and they're struggling to do so. They're going to vote for change. And if the Democrats offer that change in the midterms, realistically, that's what will happen.
So, Ted, you're anticipating affordability as the Democratic battle cry for the 2026 midterm elections. Is that how you see it?
Affordability. It's not so much the economy, stupid, but it is affordability. And for Trump to go around saying that's a Democratic lie, it's a con job, and so forth, don't believe your lying eyes, and don't believe your grocery bills. I don't know about your experience, Martin, but I've been shopping recently in rural New Hampshire and in Pittsburgh, where I am at the moment for the end of the year, and the supermarkets are much emptier, and people will tell you there that they're not going as much. They're very busy on the Wednesday of each month when the Social Security checks come in, which people are reliant. It's that bad, in a sense. The supermarkets are offering lower priced goods if they can, but the tariffs have put up the price of many imports that come from overseas, and that's making life harder on ordinary people.
Ted, how do you think Donald Trump and the Republican Party address affordability in the upcoming midterm elections, assuming that's what's really going to drive the political dialogue going forward in 2026?
Well, there'll be a few giveaways. They'll give out $2,000 to some citizens as a way to try and offset it. That's not going to fool anyone. The farmers, for example, because of Trump's mishandling of China, we lost the $40 billion soybean market, and he says, we're going to get that back. Meanwhile, I'm going to give the farmers $12 billion in Trump money. They've lost $40 billion. It comes nowhere near to making up for the losses that ordinary farmers are enduring this year, and their debts to the bank, and they're wondering what they're going to plant next year. So that sort of mishandling of the economy and of people's livelihoods is not going to be forgotten. Now, the White House will do everything possible to set up distractions. They'll talk about taking over Venezuela, talk about taking over Greenland. Donald Trump is the master of distraction on television, but people are beginning to see through it. I think the fever is breaking, and even The Apprentice, for those people who watched it, and The Celebrity Apprentice, became tired in the end, and it stopped. And Donald Trump is a 79-year-old aging celebrity whose time is running out. You even saw it in the famous Susie Wiles Vanity Fair profile, where she looks like she's beginning to wonder where the exit is as she looks after her own legacy and standing in history as a chief of staff, where she refers to J.D. Vance as being a conspiracy theorist and Trump governing like an alcoholic, even though he doesn't drink, but that he has those sort of instincts, a man who just pushes through everything. So yes, the White House will come back with distractions and other things, including distractions from the Epstein file, but people just want a better life, and that's what they're focusing on.
Ted, I'd like to move now across the Atlantic. Some of the affordability ills which ail America also seem to be experienced in Ireland. I'm thinking of housing in particular. What's your read?
Absolutely. The hollowing out of the middle class in Ireland. It used to be you could buy a house in your mid-20s with a fairly decent job. And today, that's not within reach. Young people can't buy a house. They can't afford the rents that are being charged. Many of them are moving overseas again to Australia and Canada. And there's a crisis. And it beats me, Martin, why the Irish government, with the extra financial resources, hasn't declared a national housing emergency, gotten the land, get the resources to build, and to get on with it. It seems like local planning is restricting the ability to create more houses. It's a matter of supply and demand. If you create more housing, then the price will go down, and people will be able to afford it. This is, again, what government should be doing, coming up with solutions in this area. I think it's creating a crisis in democracy in Ireland, which some right-wing extremists will exploit.
Ted, I'm curious if you read the recent October piece by John Collison in the Irish Times. Just for our listeners, Collison is Irish-born and raised, and together with his brother Patrick, is one of the co-founders of Stripe, the Silicon Valley payment behemoth, considered to be one of the most valuable privately held companies in the world of technology. In his article, Collison asserts that Irish government ministers have ceded too much power to independent agencies without regard for broader investment considerations. What's your read on that? Do you think that criticism is justified?
Yeah, I read the piece, and it's well worth anybody reading it. You can go back and Google it. Of course, they made a great deal of success with Stripe, and the motto of that part of the world, Silicon Valley, is move fast and break things, and they get a lot done, clearly. In the case of Ireland, it's move slowly and not get stuff done. And I would say he's 70% right. I wouldn't always put my trust in techie people to give the best advice. But basically, he's correct. Politicians find some sort of comfort from not taking action directly. It's a classic case of a chief executive not knowing what to do. You call in consultants and you delegate it. Government is about taking decisions. It's about responding to people's needs and not delegating power out to everybody else, planning boards and analysis, which leads to paralysis. So yes, we need to wake up and use democratic government and mandates to respond to people's needs.
Ted, I'd like to turn your attention to two recent Wall Street Journal articles which were highly critical of the Irish government. One was written by Robert C. O'Brien, a former Trump national security advisor, which describes an Ireland that is out of sync with the current American administration. The second was written by Dominic Green, accusing official Ireland of anti-Semitism. The proximity of those publications struck me as surprising. Is there a coordinated effort to discredit Ireland through the pages of the Wall Street Journal?
I think there are a few things going on here. First of all, Trump doesn't like the European Union because it has regulations in place on business and because his backers, particularly the big tech guys, have decided that the European Union's regulation of tech and of social media is a major threat to them, which it is in terms of enforcing fair speech and objecting to violent behavior on the internet and so forth. So yes, there is a coordinated campaign by the same people who brought us Brexit and financed that ridiculous decision by the UK to pull out of the European Union. And it centers on some right-wing media in London, and the Spectator and the Telegraph. And then it's supported by social media like Elon Musk in X to destabilize Ireland socially and politically. It's the same thing that's been going on in Germany, where now the AfD, extremist party, pro-Russia party, is the largest party. So Ireland better be aware of the danger presented by this campaign and become engaged in telling the truth about what's going on in Ireland, presenting a more positive narrative that people can hold on to. So yes, there's been a lot of discussion about it in the Irish newspapers and on radio. And meanwhile, we're up against the power of Elon Musk to spread conspiracy theories. Frankly, J.D. Vance hasn't moved in Ireland, but he's certainly been very active in Germany in supporting extremism. And then the Trump strategy document clearly demonstrates antagonism towards Europe, and Ireland's a member of that. And then the question arises for all of us, what do we do about this, Martin? And I think what we can do about it is create a positive narrative about what we should do. Next year is the 250th anniversary of America. And let's use that for Ireland to bridge the gap between the United States and Europe. We're a sort of hybrid state where we have great connections into America through Irish America, 35 million Irish Americans. We're a member of the EU. Let's set out with various events and the narratives like this one to say there's a positive story to be told here and about Ireland's contribution to the United States and about Europe's contribution, the EU's contribution to democracy, to stopping wars in Europe, to freedom of speech, to honest government. And let's use Ireland as a bridge in the Atlantic in whatever way we can. What do you think of that, Martin? Could we have more dialogue around that subject?
I think I'm the one that's usually asking the questions, but my take is waiting for periodic broadsides from the Wall Street Journal op-ed is not a viable strategy. The importance of Irish officials redefining the narrative can't be understated. Much of the narrative being spun against Ireland is that the country is freeloading on the back of America, NATO, and British security arrangements. That point is made aggressively also on a recent paper published by the British think tank Policy Exchange, with a foreword by the same Robert C. O'Brien, who authored one of the aforementioned Wall Street Journal op-eds. So, a new narrative, I think, is needed. But what do you think the message should be?
I think we respond by acknowledging that they have a point when it comes to Ireland's defence spending. We have been enjoying a free ride from our neighbour Britain and from NATO, and we're now facing a more hostile Russia, which is threatening our airports, our undersea cables, and which could really cripple Ireland if we don't have any defences. So yes, I think we need to invest more money in defence. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to join NATO, but if we're to protect our neutrality, we need an army. We need sophisticated defence forces. If you don't have that, then you become susceptible to takeover. So yes, that's the one area I think we need to be clear. And we also need to be positive about why American companies invest in Ireland, because we offer competitive tax rates, and President Trump's always in favour of competitive tax rates, but we offer unhindered access to the European market, the largest trading bloc in the world, and the 800 US firms operating in Ireland are successful and profitable, and they benefit from our highly educated workforce and fair system. So the relationship between Ireland and the United States is mutually beneficial. Most people in America do not know that Ireland is the fifth largest source of foreign direct investment in the United States. The fifth largest. It's an extraordinary statistic for a small island. And the US-Europe trading relationship at a wider level is worth over $1.5 trillion a year, representing 30% of global trade. There's a great story to be told about the mutual benefit of Ireland-US relations and Ireland and Europe-US relations. And we need to tell that story. And as you say, it's more than just letters. It's to the newspapers. It's going out on the front foot and creating events and bringing people to Ireland. It reminds me of the early days of when I was working for the Irish government in the 70s and 80s. We had a very active campaign bringing people to the United States to talk on the media. And of course today, it's not so much television or cable, but you have to be active on TikTok. I think X actually may be running out of steam, interestingly, and YouTube and TikTok are much more influential. So we need to punch and box much more cleverly than we often have. But I know that the Irish ambassador, Geraldine Byrne-Nason, and the Irish diplomats in the United States, as well as government at home, are very conscious of this. And I think we'll see a much greater focus on the issue in 2026.
Ted, I want to redirect you across another body of water. This time we're talking about the Irish Sea. The distance may be shorter, but matters seem troubling there as well. We're a little over a year into the tenure of Keir Starmer, the Labour government Prime Minister. Increasingly, I hear chatter of the inevitability of a Nigel Farage Reform Party government. Is that likely, and what are the implications for Ireland?
The Labour Party has a majority. It doesn't seem to be using it very effectively. It doesn't have faced an election for a while. But again, it seems to have lost the narrative to the extreme right and to Farage, and I think that's partly the social media backing for Farage. What needs to happen, frankly, is for the UK to move much closer to the EU, to coordinate as closely as possible, if not rejoin, for Hungary to leave the EU, so we'd have a much more coordinated way forward. But yes, the British Prime Minister doesn't seem to have a great personality for leadership, and that's not good. It comes back to we need strong leadership on the Democratic side. In America, you need personality. You need to look like you're a leader, and he comes across as, frankly, a bit passive and not that sort of person. But I'm hopeful that Britain can address, again, its affordability issues and can also address some of the crime that's been talked about. Immigration is the elephant in the room that we don't like to talk about very much because it's sensitive. So I would worry about immigration continuing to cause extremism even in Ireland and in Britain. For all of the ICE aggression in the United States, and people don't like what they're doing, people do want a secure border in America. There's still a majority in favor of that. I think Biden and the administration mishandled the border issues very badly and gave that opening to Trump. So if you're British or Irish or European, you want your rights to be asserted before those of immigrants or refugees. And to some extent we've forgotten that. Is that hard in the rest of the world? Maybe, but we have to look after our own citizens' have rights. Does that sound like I'm right-wing? I don't think it's right-wing or left-wing. I think it's a matter of looking after your citizens, that we should still have compassion towards the rest of the world and help it as much as we can, but we need to look after our own citizens. And to the extent we don't do that, I think we're leaving ourselves open to extremist reaction, and that's not a good thing.
Ted, I listened back to the episode we recorded this time last year. Back then, Israel had just announced the closure of their Dublin embassy. Diplomatically, things have not improved with Jerusalem this past year. The Israeli government is particularly incensed by the Irish government's Occupied Territories Bill, which would ban trade with settlements deemed illegally established there. Add in Ireland's support for the South African genocide case against Israel in the International Court of Justice, and it's unsurprising that relations between Ireland and Israel are at the lowest of ebbs. How does Ireland proceed?
I think Ireland has to be careful in saying what it's for, and the Irish government and the Irish people. And I think the fundamental thing is a two-state solution in the Middle East, and that's got still the international support. Israel and the PLO agreed to such a solution in 1993, and it still represents the best opportunities for the future and safety and security of both Israel and Palestine, if it's properly guaranteed by the 22 former Arab adversaries in the region. And so that needs to be front and foremost in my mind. The rest of it is distraction and irrelevant. The Occupied Territories Bill won't help Palestinians at all. I think it just needs to be, frankly, studied and tabled, but I wouldn't make any progress on it. I think the point does need to be made that opposing the Netanyahu policies in Gaza is not anti-Semitic at all. There are many Jewish Americans who oppose that as well. There are many Israelis, Jews, who oppose it in the country. It's almost 50-50. So let's not be distracted again by that, but let's focus on the positive. How do we advance a two-state solution? I know it seems more and more difficult, and particularly as the illegal settlements in the West Bank continue. But I think we've got to get back to joint security arrangements for both a Palestinian state and for Israel. And that is the best hope, frankly, I think, for peace. We've seen that in Ireland. You've got to recognize the equal rights in Ireland of loyalists and of Republicans, and that was a formula. It has to be the same formula in the Middle East, in my view.
My read of the Irish electorate is they want more aggressive action taken by their government on Palestine. In some respects, I think the current Irish government is taking a more measured approach and is looking to move forward, citing Ireland's role and experience in peacemaking in Northern Ireland. Would that be congruent with your thinking?
Yeah, I just think we've got to focus on the positive aspects of the two-state solution. And there's a great group in New York and in America called the J Street Group, and they focus on that, and they've got a lot of congressional support. We walked away from it because Netanyahu and his extremist government basically tried to undermine it, and the Labour government in Israel had supported it, and we've got to get back there. support. I think it's right to support a Palestinian state. That was a good decision by the Irish government. So let's just keep working towards that in any way that we can at the United Nations and elsewhere. And to say that we're not in alignment with the U.S. policy in the UN, the U.S. policy of the UN is not in alignment with the United Nations and with international law and what needs to be supported. But even President Trump became impatient with Netanyahu when he bombed a neighboring country and forced him to apologize to that leader in public at the White House on the telephone. So we have to continue to put pressure on Netanyahu to come to support a two-state solution.
Ted, the discussion has been fascinating. Unfortunately, we're at that stage of the podcast where I have to introduce Seamus Plug into the room. What would you like to point our listeners to?
That's very nice. I think as people despair about what to do in Ireland or America about the state of the world, I think the best thing we can do is go local and support our community, take pleasure in our family, particularly over the holiday, but also in our community. Go to your local pub, be it Dublin House in the Upper West Side, which is a great place. Go to your local cafe or bakery, support your local stores, support your local culture. You've covered Solas Nua in Washington. Of course, in New York, we've got Glucksman Ireland House with a great series of public events coming up in the spring. Irish Arts Centre, another one. So there's just so much great stuff going on in each city and each community. I think that's where we draw our strength. Fundamentally, whether we're in Ireland or America, we're decent people. We want the best for others, and we realize when everyone does well, we all do well. And there's no point in being selective about whose welfare we're looking after. So that may seem a little bit airy-fairy, Martin, but to my view, we get strength from our local community, and let's give back to that. And you'll have a bit of a laugh and have a few pints, and just remember, we can't necessarily always control what others do, but we can control our response. And our response can be positive and value-based and generous.
And with those wise words, I'd like to thank Ted Smyth for joining us here on Irish Stew. It's always a pleasure to talk politics in a measured and thoughtful way. I'm looking forward to doing this again next year, Ted, but also meeting in the round as well beforehand. So a happy Christmas and an even better New Year to you and your family and all those who you hold dear and close to your heart. Hey folks, it's Martin. That concludes another year at the Irish Stew podcast. It's been our busiest year to date with the release of 39 episodes in total. You can find all those episodes by visiting irishstewpodcast.com. And while there, make sure you sign up for our weekly newsletter where we update our subscribers on all the latest Irish Stew podcast news. As 2025 draws to a close, we'd like to thank all our accomplished guests for the time that they have spent with us and giving us insight into their lives and thinking. And of course, both John and I are grateful to our listeners who take the time out of their busy day to listen to Irish Stew. We'll be back again next week in the new year in 2026 when we resume our off-the-beaten-track road trip series to Ireland's hidden heartlands with a visit to the town of Kirrill's Pass in Westmeath, where we were hosted by Eugene Dunbar. Eugene took us on a walkabout of his locale, educated us on the beauty of Irish bogs and the history of his beautiful town. So until then, this is Martin Nutty, and you've been listening to the Irish Stew podcast. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.